This story is a work of fiction based on historical settings and events. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. The story contains elements of horror, suspense, and disturbing content not suitable for sensitive readers. Reader discretion is advised. The year was 1867, and the rolling hills of the Missouri Ozarks carried with them an air of quiet desolation. The war had ended, but its scars lingered: charred homesteads, fractured families, and the uneasy truce between neighbors still whispered through the misty valleys. Travelers who dared venture through the rugged terrain often found themselves enveloped in an eerie silence, broken only by the distant call of a raven or the rustling of unseen wildlife. It was a land forgotten by time, where the rivers ran dark and winding, and where small inns promised rest but rarely delivered reassurance. Among these isolated settlements, a small tavern stood by the edge of a river bend, its whitewashed walls glowing faintly in the fading sunlight. The inn appeared simple yet welcoming at first glance, a beacon for weary travelers whose feet were blistered and whose stomachs cried for nourishment. Two brothers ran the establishment, men whose ages seemed difficult to estimate, yet whose presence carried an unsettling authority. The locals spoke in hushed tones about them, calling them courteous, precise, and always polite. Travelers, however, were never entirely sure whether to trust them. The younger of the two brothers had dark hair and piercing eyes that seemed to follow a person's every movement. His older sibling, taller and broader, carried himself with an uncanny calmness, the kind that made strangers nervous despite his steady smile. They were always together, completing each other in ways that seemed almost unnatural. Guests who spent even a few hours in their presence often remarked on their eerie synchrony: gestures mirrored, speech harmonized, eyes reflecting secrets the world had no business knowing. On this particular day, a group of 3 travelers approached the inn: a merchant with a chest of fine fabrics, a young couple seeking to return home after visiting family, and a solitary wanderer who seemed perpetually on edge. The brothers greeted each of them with an impeccable charm, offering fresh water from the spring and food that smelled both wholesome and strange, as if every dish contained a hidden ingredient meant to captivate the senses. The travelers, exhausted from days on the road, paid little attention to the subtle oddities, attributing them to the quirks of rural hospitality. Yet, as the evening wore on, peculiarities began to reveal themselves. The merchant noticed that the water he drank tasted faintly metallic, yet it refreshed him with an almost unnatural vigor. The couple heard faint scratching noises from beneath the floorboards, dismissing them as rats. The lone wanderer, however, felt a shiver creep up his spine. The shadows in the corners of the tavern seemed to shift of their own accord, lingering just beyond the reach of the candlelight. The inn's interior was deceptively ordinary. Wooden beams supported the ceiling, and shelves lined the walls, stacked with jars of preserved fruits and vegetables. A fireplace crackled in the corner, yet it seemed to radiate a coldness rather than warmth. On the walls hung oil paintings of landscapes, but closer inspection revealed faces subtly warped, eyes too wide, smiles too thin, a suggestion of something beneath the veneer of rustic charm. The brothers never spoke of these paintings, never acknowledged them, yet they seemed to exude a quiet warning: here, appearances were deceptive. As night descended, the river outside glimmered under the moonlight, casting silver streaks across the inn's windows. Travelers began to retire to their rooms, but sleep did not come easily. The merchant dreamt of hands reaching through his chest, fingers curling around his heart. The couple heard whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves, indistinct but filled with menace. The wanderer saw the brothers' faces in his nightmares, their smiles widening until they appeared grotesque, teeth glinting unnaturally. By the early hours of the morning, the inn was silent save for the soft dripping of water somewhere deep in the building. No one stirred, yet the sense of being watched remained. When daylight finally broke, the travelers awoke to find small details changed. The merchant's chest slightly ajar, items rearranged on the shelves, the couple's room colder than it had been the night before. None could explain these anomalies, and each left the inn with an uneasy feeling, as if part of them had been left behind, trapped within the walls of the house. Locals passing by would later remark that the inn had always been a place of strange happenstance. Travelers arrived, ate, drank, and slept, but some never returned to their homes. Rumors circulated. Some said the brothers were mere eccentricities of the Ozarks, others believed something far darker. Yet no one dared investigate too closely, for the fear of the unknown was a stronger deterrent than curiosity. The inn remained perched on the edge of the river bend, a quiet sentinel hiding horrors beneath its calm exterior. The brothers themselves continued their daily routines, untroubled by the whispered gossip. They carried water to guests, offered meals, and smiled politely. But behind their smiles lay intentions far removed from hospitality. They had perfected the art of concealment, hiding their true nature under layers of civility. Each visitor who arrived was a puzzle piece, and the brothers had been assembling something terrible for years, something that would remain unknown to the world for decades to come. And so, the inn remained. The river flowed past it, silent and watchful. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying secrets older than anyone could remember. Travelers came and went, often unaware of the danger, drawn by the promise of rest and comfort. But the shadows in the corners, the subtle distortions of reality, and the unsettling presence of two brothers hinted that this was no ordinary place. Something dark lurked here, waiting patiently for the next unsuspecting souls to cross the threshold of the Ozarks' most disturbing inn. The morning after the first group of travelers left, the inn remained quiet, yet the air was heavy with a lingering unease. The two brothers moved about their tavern with the same meticulous precision as always, preparing for the next set of weary souls who would eventually seek shelter at their isolated establishment. Despite their calm demeanor, there was an almost imperceptible glint in their eyes, a mix of anticipation and calculation that only they seemed to understand. It wasn't long before new visitors approached the inn. The first was a solitary preacher, his black coat dusted from days of walking through the Ozarks. He carried a small satchel filled with religious tracts and a journal, his pale face reflecting both fatigue and curiosity. Following him were two hunters, roughened by weeks in the forest, carrying rifles and wearing clothing stained from their treks through muddy trails. Each traveler, while distinct in appearance and purpose, shared a common burden, the need for rest, food, and water. The brothers welcomed them with their usual charm. The taller, older sibling guided them to their rooms with a polite bow, offering warm meals and a chance to wash. The younger brother moved through the tavern, refilling cups, ensuring that the fire burned just right, and offering small talk that seemed almost too perfect, too rehearsed. For those unfamiliar with the brothers, such attentiveness would have seemed comforting. For the sensitive or wary, a quiet unease began to creep in. Dinner that evening was a feast, arranged with care and attention to detail. The preacher noticed the richness of the soup, the bread soft and warm, the water unusually crisp. The hunters, accustomed to rough meals in the wild, remarked that the food tasted better than it should. Laughter filled the tavern, stories of the trail shared, and yet beneath the veneer of camaraderie, subtle oddities lingered. The preacher felt a strange heaviness in his chest after drinking the water. The hunters noticed a faint metallic tang, barely perceptible, but it pricked at their senses. As night fell, the inn's atmosphere grew heavier. Candlelight flickered across the wooden walls, casting long shadows that seemed to shift independently of their source. The preacher, in his room, began to write in his journal, recording the details of the inn and the peculiar attentiveness of its owners. He noted the odd symmetry of their movements, and the way they often exchanged glances that seemed to communicate without words. Outside, the river whispered, and the wind carried strange, indistinct sounds that could have been branches, or something far more sinister. The hunters, meanwhile, explored the tavern in the dim light, drawn by a curiosity they could not suppress. They noticed small inconsistencies, a door that seemed slightly ajar though they were certain they had closed it, the faint scent of iron lingering in the air, and a cellar hatch that appeared worn and heavy, as if used far more than anyone would admit. They exchanged uneasy glances, each aware that the inn was not as ordinary as it seemed. Sleep did not come easily that night. The preacher dreamt of faces pressed against the walls, mouths moving but without sound. The hunters were haunted by visions of hands reaching from beneath the floorboards, grasping for their ankles, pulling them downward. Even the brothers were not immune to the night, though their rest was different, silent, purposeful, almost ritualistic. They moved in the darkness with intent, checking locks and inspecting corners where no guest dared look. By the next morning, one of the hunters was missing. The preacher, who had risen early, noticed the empty bed and the slightly disarranged room, as if someone had left in a hurry, but no footprints led away from the building. The remaining hunter began to grow nervous, and the preacher, despite his faith, could not ignore the gnawing fear that something terrible had occurred. They confronted the brothers, who responded with calm explanations and gentle reassurances, claiming the missing man had likely wandered outside, lost in the woods. Their smiles, warm and disarming, could have convinced anyone, but not entirely. The preacher attempted to leave immediately, urging the remaining hunter to follow, but the road had changed. Trails that should have led away seemed to twist unnaturally, the familiar landmarks of the forest rearranged overnight. The river's currents seemed different, the bends sharper, the water darker. Panic began to settle in. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, the distant howl of wolves, felt amplified, each one a potential herald of danger. Meanwhile, the missing hunter had been led into the cellar, though he did not yet know it. The brothers worked methodically, ensuring the traveler remained unconscious, restrained, and unharmed physically but trapped psychologically. Their methods were precise, a combination of herbal sedatives and controlled fear, designed to disorient and terrify, keeping the victims compliant without leaving evidence of trauma. It was a skill honed over years, perfected in secret, a darkness hidden beneath the guise of hospitality. By mid-morning, the preacher managed to escape the inn, stumbling through the woods, praying aloud for guidance. He would later tell fragmented accounts of what occurred inside, though few believed him. The townsfolk dismissed his claims as the overactive imagination of a weary traveler. But some details could not be ignored. The hunter who returned, pale and trembling, spoke of whispers in the walls, of the brothers' eyes following him, of the sense that the inn itself was alive and aware. The inn became a place of legend almost overnight. Travelers who arrived reported minor oddities, food that tasted wrong, the sensation of being watched, and doors that creaked open with no one in sight. Few stayed long, but those who did often left changed, quieter, haunted by memories they could not fully articulate. Locals spoke of the brothers in hushed tones, the riverside tavern a place of danger disguised as refuge. Children were warned not to stray near it, and even hardened hunters avoided its doors after dark. Despite the growing number of rumors, the brothers' facade remained impeccable. They continued to serve food and water with smiles, their movements precise, their conversations polite. And yet, beneath it all, a growing pattern emerged. Visitors arrived seeking rest, and some never truly left. The air around the inn seemed to thrum with anticipation, as if the building itself awaited the next group of unsuspecting travelers. By the end of the week, a pattern had solidified. The preacher's warnings, the hunter's fragmented stories, and the whispered rumors of missing persons coalesced into a chilling realization. the brothers were far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. But how they eluded suspicion, how they maintained their polite and orderly tavern, remained a mystery. The answers lay hidden within the inn's walls, in the cellar, and in the hearts of two men whose kindness was merely a mask for something far more sinister. The Ozarks were quiet once more, yet the wind carried a subtle warning, one that those who had escaped would never forget. Travelers continued to arrive, unaware of the danger, drawn to a place where water and food were offered freely, but where the shadows hid horrors beyond comprehension. The inn awaited, patient and watchful, and the brothers, ever polite, prepared to receive their next visitors with smiles that did not reach their eyes. The whispers began quietly, barely audible over the hum of daily life in the Ozarks. It started with the townsfolk noticing travelers who arrived at the riverside but never seemed to continue their journeys. Some returned with vacant stares, others disappeared entirely, leaving only abandoned belongings behind. Mothers warned their children not to stray near the tavern. Hunters who had passed through the woods shared uneasy glances, their voices dropping to a murmur when mentioning the brothers. Despite these stories, no one dared act openly. Fear was a powerful deterrent. The brothers, with their unnerving politeness and calculated charm, had cultivated a reputation that masked suspicion. They knew how to present themselves to townspeople, helping with chores, providing free supplies when necessary, and offering loans with a smile. Yet their presence carried an intangible weight, a sense that watching eyes followed you even when they were elsewhere. The preacher who had barely escaped the inn attempted to warn the locals. His accounts were fragmented, often dismissed as the exaggerations of a weary traveler. The inn, the water, the cellar, he whispered urgently to anyone who would listen. But townsfolk shook their heads, unwilling to confront a danger so inexplicable. It was easier to chalk up disappearances to accidents, predatory animals, or misfortune than to believe in deliberate malice. Among those who did pay attention, however, a pattern emerged. The missing travelers shared commonalities. All had arrived at the inn under the cover of dusk, all had consumed the brothers' food and water, and none had ever been seen again without exception. Some locals quietly investigated, attempting to track movements or trace the paths of those who vanished. Each effort failed, as though the inn itself conspired to hide its secrets. Even the sheriff, a man of reason and discipline, could not ignore the growing number of unexplained absences. He began to collect reports, each one more disturbing than the last. Letters arrived from merchants traveling through nearby counties, speaking of lost companions. Families wrote to townsfolk, desperate for news. And yet, the brothers remained untouchable, their inn a symbol of civility, their smiles disarming, their hands clean. Children, however, noticed details adults often overlooked. They spoke of shadows that moved without source, laughter that came from empty rooms, and whispers carried by the wind at night. Some claimed to have glimpsed the brothers speaking to unseen figures in the woods, or carrying bundles that no one would dare question. The adults dismissed these stories as childish imagination, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Locals began to notice subtle, strange signs around the inn, marks etched into the beams, symbols scratched near doorways, and small cages hidden in corners, often filled with insects or small animals. Even without full comprehension, these observations created a creeping unease. The Brothers' Tavern, once seen as a haven for travelers, now carried a shadow of menace, a sense that it was more than just an ordinary inn. By the end of this period, the rumor mill had grown impossible to ignore. The inn had become a topic of hushed conversation, whispered late at night around firesides, discussed only in the shadows. Every news story added to the air of dread, painting the brothers as figures of mystery and fear. Travelers still came, drawn by exhaustion or necessity, but the locals watched closely, unsure if they should warn the innocent or let the inevitable unfold. In the Ozarks, fear was not always loud, it often thrived quietly, in the spaces between words and glances. And the inn, with its polite owners and hidden horrors, had become a focal point for that fear, a place where the boundaries of hospitality and horror blurred, and where the line between rumor and truth grew thinner with each passing day. It was the arrival of a wandering scholar that would finally pierce the careful facade of the Brothers' Inn. Unlike ordinary travelers, he carried curiosity as much as luggage, and a determination to uncover truths that others preferred to ignore. The townsfolk warned him, recounting stories of disappearances and strange happenings, but he was undeterred, his mind drawn to patterns others had overlooked. The scholar arrived on a fog-laden evening, the river glinting dimly under a crescent moon. He was greeted, as always, with the brothers' courteous smiles and polite hospitality. Meals were served with precision, and water poured from a spring that seemed purer than any he had known. Yet something unsettled him. The air was too still, the candlelight too steady, and the shadows seemed to cling closer than they should. Driven by instinct, he began to explore the inn, first noticing small anomalies, floorboards slightly raised, doors that resisted closure, and faint scratches along the edges of tables and shelves. These minor irregularities grew into more alarming discoveries: a hidden room behind a false wall, faint stains that resisted scrubbing, and the scent of iron lingering where it had no business. The scholar felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a warning that something terrible lurked beneath the ordinary appearance of the inn. Late that night, he descended into the cellar, guided by instinct and a sense of urgency he could not explain. The darkness swallowed him, and the faint glow of a lantern revealed a macabre scene: cages stacked along the walls, containing small animals, some dead, some barely alive. Symbols etched into the stones suggested ritualistic practices, and a journal lay open, its pages filled with meticulous notes about travelers, their habits, and the effects of certain herbs and concoctions. The scholar realized with horror that the brothers' hospitality had always served a darker purpose. Their polite smiles and careful service masked years of preparation, experiments conducted on the unsuspecting, using both fear and subtle poisons to study human reactions. The inn was not merely a resting place, it was a laboratory of terror, its owners both scientists and executioners in a cruel, methodical design. As he examined the room, a noise behind him made him freeze, a soft, deliberate step on the wooden stairs. One of the brothers appeared, face calm, eyes cold. The scholar understood immediately. He had been discovered. The tension was suffocating, the air thick with the scent of iron and dust. Escape seemed impossible, yet the scholar's mind raced for a way to survive, to flee and expose the horrors that lay hidden behind the inn's polite exterior. The scene closed with a shiver-inducing realization: the inn's secrets were not limited to the past. The brothers were meticulous, patient, and fully aware of every movement within their establishment. Discovery was not the end of danger, it was merely the beginning. And the scholar, though terrified, knew that revealing the truth would be a struggle against not only the brothers but an entire system of fear, silence, and complicity that had allowed these horrors to persist unnoticed for years. The scholar barely escaped the inn that night, emerging into the foggy Ozarks with the taste of iron still lingering in his mouth. Every step he took away from the tavern carried the echo of the horrors he had witnessed, yet he could not abandon the sense that the inn, and its sinister keepers, remained a threat. In his journal, he meticulously recorded every detail: the hidden cellar, the cages, the journals, the strange symbols. But even as he wrote, he sensed eyes upon him, the presence of the brothers extending beyond the confines of their inn, reaching into the mist itself. Word of his discovery began to spread cautiously, through the network of townsfolk, hunters, and merchants who had long suspected something was amiss. Some dismissed him as overly imaginative. Others whispered that the inn was a place best avoided at all costs. Yet a few brave, or perhaps foolish, souls felt compelled to investigate further. Among them was a local hunter, hardened by years in the wilderness, who had heard the faintest rumors from his family, the disappearances, the whispered warnings, the unexplained sounds that drifted from the inn after dusk. One night, the hunter approached the inn, cloaked in darkness and armed with lantern and rifle. The brothers greeted him as they always did, their smiles calm, their politeness flawless. They led him to a room, offering food and drink, yet every gesture carried an undercurrent of intent, a subtle manipulation designed to relax him while keeping him off balance. As the hunter ate, he noticed small irregularities: bread slightly stale despite appearing fresh, water with an unfamiliar taste, shadows that did not correspond with candlelight. As the evening deepened, the hunter felt the air grow heavier, almost suffocating, with a presence that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. He noticed faint markings etched into beams and floorboards, and the sound of scratching beneath the floor grew louder, almost rhythmic, like a warning. The brothers' behavior was meticulous, almost ritualistic. Every movement seemed preordained, rehearsed, as if the inn itself moved to an unseen rhythm. When he explored the tavern, he stumbled upon another hidden door, concealed beneath a rug. His curiosity overpowered fear, and he opened it, descending into the darkness. The cellar sprawled below, larger than it appeared from above, its walls lined with cages. The air was thick with decay and the metallic tang of old blood. Animals cowered, and remnants of past victims, a torn shoe, a small bag, a journal, hinted at the scale of the brothers' actions. Each detail reinforced the horrifying truth: the inn was a place of systematic cruelty, a site where fear and experimentation intertwined. The hunter's heart pounded as he navigated the cellar, discovering journals and charts detailing the brothers' observations of travelers, their reactions to certain foods and herbs, and the precise methods used to ensure compliance. He realized the horror extended beyond physical harm. The brothers studied psychological terror with meticulous dedication. The inn was their laboratory, every visitor a subject, every meal a test, every drink a potential tool of manipulation. Suddenly, the faintest shuffle echoed behind him. One of the brothers appeared, moving with the same unnerving calm, eyes cold and piercing. The hunter froze, understanding in an instant that escape would not be simple. The brother's smile was polite but empty, concealing intentions that were far more sinister than words could convey. The hunter realized that his survival depended on cunning and composure, yet fear gnawed at his mind, weakening his resolve. The encounter escalated into a tense game of psychological warfare. The brothers' calm demeanor contrasted with the hunter's rising panic. They spoke softly, asking questions, probing his mind, each inquiry designed to unnerve, confuse, and assert dominance. Even in silence, their presence was suffocating, a reminder that every move was watched, every thought assessed. The hunter began to notice subtle manipulations in the air, faint odors, almost imperceptible movements of objects, shadows that seemed to respond to his attention. By the end of the night, the hunter barely escaped, emerging into the mist with a sense of relief tainted by dread. He knew that the brothers were not merely cruel. They were methodical, patient, and aware of every detail, every reaction. The inn was more than a building. It was a trap, a sentient instrument of terror guided by two men who had perfected the art of fear. In the days that followed, the scholar and the hunter compared notes, piecing together the extent of the horrors that had been committed. Survivors were few, fragmented, and terrified. The brothers' reach, it seemed, extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. The inn's reputation, once a benign stopover, had transformed into a symbol of dread. Those who dared speak of it found themselves silenced by disbelief or the subtle influence of the brothers' charm. And yet the inn remained. Travelers still came, drawn by necessity, unaware of the danger that awaited. The brothers waited patiently, polishing their smiles, preparing for the next visitors, confident that their secrets would remain hidden, and that fear, both subtle and overt, would continue to guard their twisted domain. The confrontation came unexpectedly. It was not a grand battle or an elaborate trap, but the inevitable collision of curiosity, courage, and the brothers' meticulous control over the inn. The scholar and the hunter, having survived previous encounters, returned together, determined to uncover the full truth behind the disappearances and to finally confront the men responsible for years of terror. They approached the inn under the cover of twilight, the mist curling around the river like a spectral guardian. Inside, the inn appeared unchanged, polished, orderly, deceptively ordinary. The brothers greeted them with calm smiles and cordial gestures, offering dinner and refreshments. Yet this time, the scholar and the hunter were prepared. They observed carefully, noting every irregularity, the subtle metallic scent in the water, the unnatural precision of the brothers' movements, the faint sound of scratching behind walls. Every detail reinforced their suspicion that the inn was more than a resting place. It was a carefully maintained trap. After the meal, the scholar attempted to provoke a reaction. He asked questions about past visitors, about strange noises, about the purpose of the cellar. The brothers responded politely, their calm manner unwavering, yet the air between them grew tense. It was clear that they were assessing, calculating, anticipating the intruder's next moves. Every word, every gesture, every glance carried weight, and the inn itself seemed to hum with a quiet menace. Finally, the scholar and hunter descended into the cellar. What they had discovered before paled in comparison to the horrors waiting now. The hidden room revealed new cages, more meticulously organized and far larger than previously suspected. Journals lined the walls, detailing the brothers' research, the effects of fear, sedatives, manipulation, and subtle toxins on their visitors. The documents showed a systematic approach to cruelty, one that combined psychological terror with calculated physical control. Each entry read like a clinical report, cold and detached, yet profoundly horrifying. It was then that the brothers appeared in the cellar, silent and deliberate, their calmness contrasting sharply with the panic surging through the scholar and hunter. The taller brother spoke first, his voice low and measured. "Curiosity is dangerous," he said. "You see what you should not, and now you must face the consequences." The younger brother remained silent, but the intensity of his gaze communicated a threat more terrifying than words could convey. The confrontation became a tense psychological battle. The brothers did not attack immediately. Instead, they used patience, observation, and subtle manipulation. They studied every reaction, every flinch, and every glance, using fear itself as a weapon. The scholar realized that brute force alone would not succeed. They were dealing with men who had mastered control over both the mind and body of anyone who entered their domain. In that dark, oppressive cellar, the full revelation of the brothers' methods became clear. They had not only served food and water laced with sedatives but had carefully monitored and recorded responses, creating detailed psychological profiles of their victims. Their hospitality was a facade for systematic terror, a combination of experiment, ritual, and perverse enjoyment. Every visitor had been studied, every reaction catalogued, every weakness exploited. The scholar and hunter understood the stakes. Escape meant exposing the truth, surviving the brothers' calculated control, and carrying knowledge that could save others. Yet the inn itself seemed complicit, the shadows deepening, the air thick with anticipation, as if the building awaited the outcome of this confrontation. The brothers' patience broke the first time the scholar moved too aggressively toward the cellar exit. In a swift, deliberate motion, they blocked his path, forcing him to confront the reality of their dominance. The hunter, attempting to intervene, felt the psychological weight of the brothers' control pressing against him, a suffocating presence that made rational thought difficult. Every step, every breath was a battle against fear itself. Finally, in a brief moment of distraction, the scholar managed to grab a journal and throw it into the fire, the flames illuminating the cellar and exposing the grotesque extent of the brothers' atrocities. Panic flashed in the younger brother's eyes for the first time, a crack in the polished facade. The older brother, however, remained composed, a silent reminder that their mastery of terror was far from over. The confrontation ended ambiguously. The scholar and hunter escaped into the misty Ozarks, shaken and haunted. The brothers remained in their inn, calm, calculating, and still in control. The full truth of their crimes was partially revealed, yet many questions remained unanswered. How many victims had they claimed? How long had their operation truly persisted? And most chillingly, would they continue, patiently awaiting the next travelers, perfecting their methods, and ensuring that horror remained hidden behind polite smiles? In the weeks and months following the confrontation, a peculiar unease settled over the surrounding Ozarks region. The scholar and the hunter, despite their harrowing experience, struggled to make their voices heard. Their accounts, though detailed and vivid, were met with disbelief and skepticism. Letters sent to newspapers were dismissed as exaggerations, and conversations in the town square were met with polite nods and cautious avoidance. People wanted to believe the inn was simply a peculiar curiosity, not the epicenter of malevolent intent. The brothers, meanwhile, maintained the impeccable facade they had perfected over years. They continued to serve travelers with warmth and courtesy, moving through the inn with the same careful precision. Those who arrived after the scholar's warnings had little reason to suspect danger. Their observations, subtle as they were dismissed by their own instincts or rationalized by necessity. The brothers' control extended far beyond the walls of the tavern. It seeped into the minds of those who might expose them, bending perception through charm, subtle intimidation, and the human tendency to ignore the inexplicable. Rumors circulated, however, and fear quietly festered. Families of missing travelers became suspicious, piecing together fragmented accounts. Hunters who had previously skirted the edges of the inn began avoiding the roads leading there entirely, their whispered warnings reaching only those willing to listen. The scholar, aware that their work had only partially revealed the truth, attempted to gather more evidence, but the inn's isolation, combined with the brothers' cunning, made concrete documentation nearly impossible. The townsfolk, torn between curiosity and fear, began noticing oddities in retrospect. Journal entries, once thought mundane, hinted at disappearances stretching back decades. Property near the inn was strangely undervalued, paths intentionally misleading, and even the river itself seemed to create natural barriers against pursuit. The inn, in essence, had become a trap camouflaged by routine, a place that manipulated both geography and psychology to protect its secrets. At the heart of the growing mystery was the realization that the brothers' crimes were methodical, calculated, and disturbingly patient. They were not impulsive murderers or reckless criminals. They were strategists, meticulous archivists of human behavior. The cellar, journals, and hidden rooms revealed only fragments of their operations, yet even these fragments painted a horrifying picture. Visitors were chosen, observed, manipulated, and sometimes eliminated, all while maintaining the appearance of harmless hospitality. Authorities, constrained by the limits of communication and resources in the post-war Ozarks, found little they could do. Investigations led to dead ends, trails that vanished into the wilderness, and witness testimonies that often conflicted. The scholar and hunter's reports, though compelling, were insufficient to prompt official action. In essence, the brothers had perfected a system of invisibility, of committing horrors with a precision that kept law and society at bay. Despite the apparent stagnation, a threat of unease persisted. The inn's reputation, though unofficial, had spread far beyond its immediate vicinity. Merchants, travelers, and even distant townspeople shared warnings in hushed tones. Yet fear ensured silence. Those who might have investigated more thoroughly were too intimidated by the reputation of the brothers and the isolation of the location. The inn remained a place of both curiosity and terror, its very presence reinforcing the psychological weight of rumor and suspicion. By the end of this period, the narrative of the brothers' actions had become a fragmented legend. The inn, perched by the river bend, appeared unchanged, yet beneath the surface, the machinery of terror continued. Hidden chambers, journals, and the ever-watchful presence of the brothers ensured that the truth remained partially obscured. Only a handful of survivors, scattered and traumatized, carried the fragments of knowledge that could one day reveal the full extent of the horror. And yet, even with some truths emerging, the story deepened. The inn's secrets seemed layered, intentionally concealed, as if the brothers understood that partial discovery could be a weapon in itself, fear amplified by ambiguity, terror magnified by uncertainty. The region, the travelers, and even history itself seemed ensnared by their careful planning. The cold case of missing persons and the inn's hidden horrors became a puzzle, a mystery that stretched decades, leaving the world to wonder how many had disappeared. How many more would be claimed? And how could anyone confront such meticulous evil when the perpetrators were patient, polite, and terrifyingly precise? The chilling realization lingered: the inn's horrors were far from over. Those who dared approach it faced not only the risk of physical danger but the creeping, insidious psychological torment that the brothers had perfected over years. Their cruelty, masked by civility, had become legend. And in the shadows, the river whispered, carrying the secrets of the past, present, and perhaps, the next unsuspecting travelers who would stumble upon the Ozarks' darkest inn. Years passed, but the inn remained, unchanged in appearance yet alive with an invisible menace. The river continued to wind past its walls, the mist curling around the foundation, and the forest stretched endlessly, hiding the paths that once trapped travelers in confusion and fear. Those who had survived encounters with the brothers carried with them a haunting awareness. The inn was not merely a place of past horrors. It was a living, patient entity, waiting for the next victims to enter its doors. The scholar and the hunter, though scarred by their experiences, dedicated themselves to preserving the memory of what they had discovered. They documented every detail, every journal, every observation, and shared their warnings with those willing to listen. Yet, in a world recovering from war and hardship, few took the threat seriously. Letters went unanswered, reports were dismissed, and curiosity often succumbed to skepticism. Still, the truth persisted in fragments, whispered among travelers, recorded in hidden journals, and told quietly to children who were warned never to wander near the river bend. The brothers themselves continued their work with unnerving precision. Polite smiles, measured movements, and carefully prepared meals remained their tools of control. Each new traveler represented a puzzle, an opportunity to study human behavior, and an occasion to exercise their dominance. While the world moved on, oblivious to the quiet evil nestled in the Ozarks, the inn maintained its sinister operations, invisible yet omnipresent. Over time, local legends grew, merging rumor and reality into a chilling narrative. The inn became a symbol of the unknown, a cautionary tale told around firesides and in hushed voices. Travelers vanish without a trace, shadows move where no one stands, and the polite tavern owners are more than they appear. Children grew up fearing the river bend, families avoided the woods after dusk, and the memory of the scholar and hunter's warnings lingered like a faint echo of sanity in a world otherwise silent to the horrors within the inn. Visitors continued to arrive, drawn by necessity, curiosity, or the illusion of hospitality. Some left immediately, sensing the unnatural atmosphere, while others lingered too long, unaware of the mechanisms of fear the brothers had perfected. Every detail, from the arrangement of furniture to the taste of the water, was designed to manipulate perception, to encourage submission, and to conceal the underlying cruelty. Each interaction reinforced the insidious nature of the inn, embedding terror beneath the veneer of civility. The legacy of the brothers was not confined to those who had encountered them directly. Survivors' stories, fragmented and inconsistent, spread through the region, creating a network of whispers that carried dread far beyond the inn's immediate vicinity. Some dismissed these tales as exaggerations, yet the persistence of the accounts, coupled with the pattern of disappearances, cemented the inn's place as a locus of fear. Its reputation became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Travelers wary of its history often approached with heightened caution, which only intensified the psychological hold the brothers exerted over them. Even decades later, historians and investigators, piecing together old records, noted a string of unexplained disappearances centered on the inn's location. Maps from the period marked it as a stopover, yet personal journals, letters, and police reports hinted at something far more sinister. The cold case of the missing travelers remained unsolved, and the full extent of the brothers' crimes was likely lost to time. What endured, however, was the chilling knowledge that evil could be patient, polite, and methodical, leaving no trace except the fear it instilled in those who survived. The inn, perched by the river bend, continued to stand as it always had. Its windows reflected the morning sun, its doors welcomed weary travelers, and its meals were served with the same meticulous care. But behind every smile, beneath every polite gesture, lurked the same calculated menace, the quiet, relentless presence of two men who had mastered the art of control and terror. In the Ozarks, the river whispered, and the forests waited, but the inn remained eternal, a monument to the patient, terrifying legacy of the brothers who served more than water to travelers. Those who knew the truth understood that the horrors of the past were not gone. They were merely hidden, waiting for the next unwitting souls to step through the doors of the most disturbing tavern the Ozarks had ever known. The legacy endured. And the inn, ever patient, continued its silent watch,